Hello and welcome to my video about meta patterns. I'm David Cuff of WorkLife Development. What are meta patterns, you may ask? Well, neuro-linguistic programming describes meta patterns as the software of our brains, the motivational and working patterns we have chosen or learned to use in translation of the world and everyday interactions. Many of you will be familiar with NLP and its toolkit, and we look to that in identifying a person's meta patterns, which are a key ingredient of the profiling process we do in our people development programs and prior to coaching. Context is crucial in our selection of which meta programs we run, and once you're aware of your preferences, the software you instinctively choose to run, then you can also choose some alternate patterns for better outcomes available or keep in check behaviours that might not benefit you in that context. Meta patterns are not about who we are, identity, but more about how and why we do things, capabilities and values, beliefs. Hence, we are able to run all the patterns to some degree or another, and we use different patterns depending on the context, time, and our own emotional state. So, for example, you may find you have fewer choices available to you when you are highly stressed compared to when you are unstressed. There is no right and wrong in the world of patterns and personality, although certain combinations may be more useful in some situations than in others. Each pattern should be thought of as a continuum rather than simply an either-or. There are no absolutes. Humans are infinitely flexible, and no one responds in exactly the same way to each and every stimulus. Few people tend to operate all the time at an extreme, although you may find that individuals have preferences or predominant patterns. When figuring out someone's patterns, it's important to remember that I'm doing so for a particular context. It would be unwise to assume that people use the same patterns all the time in every situation. Patterns can be divided into two basic types: motivational ones, which provide information on how someone triggers their motivation, i.e. what gets them started, and working ones, which provide information on how they maintain their motivation, i.e. how they deal with the information presented to them and how they get convinced about something. In this video, we look into the key meta patterns we believe are crucial to highlight in growing self-awareness. And in tandem with FIRO-B scores and the Belbin team worker inventories, identification of these meta patterns and fathoming which ones you prefer will deliver real insight into yourself and is a key plank in personal development and growth, and ultimately getting where you want to be. We can profile for these meta patterns using dialogue technique, face-to-face, via Skype or over the phone. Alternatively, we can use a questionnaire and send it to you by email. Representational systems are the meta patterns that come to the forefront when people think of neuro-linguistic programming. In a nutshell, people use their brains differently to code their experiences and retrieve their memories. Our brains think by seeing images, hearing sounds, and feeling sensations in our mind. People tend to develop one of these systems more strongly, and then by adulthood have a preference for one. Visual people will notice a person's appearance and facial expressions. Auditory people are strongly influenced by tone of voice, and kinesthetic people are responsive to feelings and emotions. It's easy to spot a person's favoured sensory representation system by listening to the predicates they use in everyday language. And if you look here, you can see a list of predicates for visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and auditory digital. Have a look at those for a second. Which are the words that you like? Listen to when someone's talking. Then you'll start to hear these predicates. So, most adults will ultimately select visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or auditory digital representation. There is gustatory and olfactory, but mostly those are the four common. Everyone uses a spectrum of predicates, and you'll see by looking at the lists above which you prefer. There are all sorts of physiological clues to people's representation systems. So visual people will talk with a lot of gesticulation, their arms out in front of themselves. Auditory people will often sit still and cock their ears towards the person they're talking with. Kinesthetic people will move about a lot, leg crossing, fidgeting, and auditory digital people will often look down and resist eye contact. So when I walk into a room, I can often tell quite quickly what people's representation system is by looking at their behaviour and looking at their physiology when I'm speaking with them or when they're speaking with others. Now, there are many behavioural attributes that attach to each representation system, and a benefit of recognising the preferred representation system is in communication with others and making connections, literally using words which have more impact, make more impression, have a greater resonance, or just make more sense to the person you are speaking with. Okay, let's consider the area of motivational direction and look at the towards or away from meta pattern. These meta patterns determine how someone becomes motivated, either by an objective to be achieved towards or a situation to be avoided, away from. People tend to move towards or away from values, i.e. things they are willing to invest time and energy in to either achieve or avoid. Hence, to motivate someone, it is necessary to discover their direction and the values that they move toward or away from. If you listen carefully to what a person says after the word because, you will either find a toward or away from statement. So how we recognise a person's motivational direction is in dialogue, asking why having something is important or what it will do. So, why is having that gym membership important? What will having the gym membership do for you? Away from people think in terms of what should be avoided and are energised by threats. If I exercise and regularly and eat healthy food, I won't get fat. Away from people can be prone to procrastination. They won't necessarily act until the penalty for not acting gets painful enough. They can find it difficult to stick to goals, but are good at troubleshooting and firefighting. They stop bad things from happening. Away from people can easily spot what has to be avoided or potential weaknesses in plans. They become motivated when there is a problem to be solved and they sense trouble as looming. They can get distracted from their goals and often feel compelled to attend to negative situations. Whatever goes wrong, or might go wrong, will attract their attention, and this makes it difficult for them to prioritise. They are very good at solving problems, and they respond best to pressure. Away from, the motivation is about what they don't want, the situations to be avoided. So I'm going to the gym to stop me looking fat and to avoid a heart attack and being unfit. And the body language you would see with away from are gestures of exclusion, the shaking of the head, the arms indicating that something to be avoided or excluded. And the influencing language for away from people you can use are stay away from, get rid of, steer clear of, prevent, fix, avoid, eliminate, solve. These are all words that have much more meaning to someone who's running an away from pattern. A towards motivated person talks about what they want, to achieve, to gain, to get. So in the case of the gym membership, they might say, it's going to help me tone my body and look beautiful. I want to get the perfect figure. Towards people stay focused on their goal. They are motivated by achievement and the end result sometimes to the extent that they have trouble in identifying, ignore or minimise potential problems that may be encountered along the way. They are energised by goals and targets and are good at prioritising. And they respond best to incentives. Towards people think in terms of goals and are motivated by achievement. They can be great visionaries, but may also be naive as they have difficulty identifying problems. They may indulge in too much blue sky thinking or set unrealistic goals, but they generally get a lot out of life. So with a towards person, the body language you would see is pointing towards something, head nodding, and gestures of inclusion. And the influencing words for towards people are inclusion, attain, obtain, accomplish, etc. So working with towards people to motivate them, make sure you're highlighting what they are doing will help them get what they want. A person's motivational direction cannot be considered good or bad. It's just one direction or the other. Motivations go towards or away from what you care about, your values. So, for example, people often think away from is bad. But if you look at saving the whale, kicking out racism, saving the planet, that's not bad, is it? It's simply a direction. Being conscious of your own internal motivational direction can be very helpful. So if you have a towards preference and in a meeting find yourself getting turned off an idea because someone is raising a lot of problems, be conscious that you may not have been motivated to explore those potential pitfalls to the same degree as the person who's raising them, and that to achieve what you want, someone has to deal with the potential problems. So rest easy. Similarly, if you have an away from preference and are sitting in a brainstorm meeting where the purpose of the meeting is to throw out blue sky thinking, and you are seeing loads of potential problems in your head, perhaps recognise that to avoid spoiling the flow of creativity and upsetting people, that you should save the problems for when you are at a reviewing stage. So, understanding your motivational direction and spotting those of others can be very helpful in achieving more harmonious relationships and avoiding very common problems. Okay, so now we know about the direction of motivational patterns. Let's look at the source. The source of our motivations is our frame of reference, or the locus of control. These are either internal or external meta patterns, the source of motivation and judgments. You will be mostly running one or the other. In a nutshell, external people look outside for evidence, data, feedback and information to help them make decisions. Internal people look inside to make their decisions. They care more about what their own thoughts and computations are than any external inputs. People are wired differently in terms of the source of their motivation and judgments. These patterns are the primary focus for judging, evaluating, and deciding responses. So the source, the frame of reference or locus of control, refers to where the source of motivation resides. Does the person find motivation from external sources or from a set of internal standards and beliefs? This is not to be confused with introversion or extroversion. Although there are parallels, an extroverted person can have an internal frame of reference, and an introverted person can have an external frame of reference. Although we all have a natural position on this spectrum, a definite presence, this can vary depending on context. So for instance, someone who prefers the internal frame of reference in terms of evaluating travel options or financial investments may not be entirely comfortable following their own judgment with regard to fashion or food. External people need other people's opinions and direction. Decision making is based on external sources, and they use external standards and feedback to develop their own opinions. If they do not get this information, they don't know how well they are doing. They often take information as instructions and find it difficult to start or maintain an activity without someone else deciding or giving feedback. They are accommodating in groups and can modify their behaviour based on external feedback. They are influenced by others and will feel more comfortable doing what others have done before them or following the advice of experts. They value other people's opinions to help them make decisions. In terms of pattern recognition, a good question to ask is, how do you know when you have done a good job at something? So the external response would be, they've looked to other people or external sources for information to decide or judge for them. They need to compare their work with an external standard, a checklist or a quota. Outside information is taken as a decision or an order. So, in terms of the body language, you'll find external people leaning forward, watching for your response. Their facial expressions will be indicating that they want to know from you if it was all right. The influencing language for external preferences is you'll get good feedback. Others will notice. It has been approved by. It is well respected. You will make quite an impact. So-and-so thinks. I would strongly recommend. The facts and the figures show. Give references and give lots of feedback. Internal people provide their own motivation. They tend to rely on their own criteria, evaluations and judgments and validation for their decisions that come from within. They use their own feelings to decide that they have done a good job. They may have difficulty accepting other people's opinions, and when they receive negative feedback about a job which they believe they have done well, they may well make judgments about the person giving that feedback. They are convinced, however, when you appeal to things that they already know through their own experience. Example, only you can decide. They treat instructions as information and consequently may be quite difficult to supervise. They are self-reliant and can be cynical and stubborn. They will strongly resist outside influences unless they judge it to have a value. They seek out information and then they use their own set of criteria to help them decide how to proceed. Their criteria may be good or faulty, so even though they think they are right, they can still be mistaken. In terms of pattern recognition, you've got the question again, how do you know when you've done a good job? The internal person would say, they just know. It feels right. I decide. They resist when someone tries to tell them what is right for them. The body language for an internal person will be sitting upright, pointing to the self. They may pause before answering a judgment from someone whilst they evaluate it. Minimal gestures or facial expressions for their culture. And the influencing language for internal preferences, only you decide. You might consider, it's up to you. Try it out and decide what you think. Here's some information so you can decide. What do you think? As with other meta patterns, you can identify internals or externals by listening to what they say and watching their body language, their physiology. Internals will use a lot of I think or I believe to introduce opinions, where for externals it will be my friend thinks or experts say. Internals often point to themselves when giving an opinion or make emphatic pointing gestures to their listeners. They may also cross their arms when listening to you or clasp both hands over the back of their head. Externals tend to keep looking at their listeners to gauge their response. Knowing your own preference in terms of the source of your motivations and judgments is helpful in developing your self-awareness. So external people, let others know you need regular feedback, and internal people, listen carefully and see if someone's trying to tell you to do something. External people may frustrate internal people with checking and requests for evidence. Internal people may frustrate external people who don't provide them with enough information. Internal people can easily go missing in company while they ruminate internally on a process. They're working something out, to the extent that they effectively hold back information which could be helpful in the moment to others. External people can frustrate others with knee-jerk reactions to new information. So a good process in group situations is for external people to ask the internal people to quickly update where they are with something. That forces the internal person to unpack observations they've made and provides the external people with richer data to weigh up the arguments. Similarly, internal people can ask the external people for time out of a meeting so they can think things through and come back with their computations. So, awareness of our preferences in the source of our motivations and those of others provides the opportunity for us to get what we want from them and to defend against the inherent weaknesses of our default approach and to practice and develop techniques to reprogram ourselves as we want to. Okay, on to people and task. Am I people or am I task? Well, it depends on whether you prioritise the people or the task in any scenario. What you see on the screen is two FireOB results grids. The FireOB is an excellent tool for telling us if someone is people or task focused, as it details people's interpersonal needs in the people and task areas. Now, control is a task measure, whereas inclusion and affection are people measures. So, here we have person A and person B. They both have the same number of total points, 32, but person A has the most individual points, 14, in inclusion, a people measure, the furthest left column, and person B has the most individual points, 14, in the area of control, a task measure, the column to the right of inclusion. So, person A favours the people meta pattern and person B favours the task meta pattern. Without using the FireOB, it is still quite simple to fathom in dialogue with somebody whether they are people or task. People will always associate individual people with tasks and activities, so you'll hear names a lot. Task people will not. They will focus on the tasks and tools and the departments. So, in a meeting scenario, let's say the project manager is a task person and they are asked about the status of a project. This is what they might say. We're launching in 2 months. Marketing are working on the advertising concepts and the digital team is sourcing the online video. We've had the budget released by finance and the print suppliers have been dealt with. HR have said they're getting some interns into supporters in the first 2 weeks and legal have cleared the trademarks and sorted the copyright. Now, if this person had a preference for people rather than task, they may have answered the same question in this way. We're launching in 2 months. Siobhan is working on the advertising concepts and Steve and Amy are sourcing the online video. We've had the budget released by Colin and I'm liaising with John from Printo Plus. Helen has said she's getting some interns into supporters in the first 2 weeks and Karina has cleared the trademarks and sorted the copyright. Now, with both preferences you've heard the same answer, but you can see how the people or the task preference can vary the communication. So what does it mean and why does it matter? One key point to note is that people will always put the person ahead of the task, and task people will always put the task ahead of the person. So, depending on your philosophy, either approach is right or wrong. Task people might work you too hard, and they might dump you too easy. People might be too lenient. So it's good to know what's going on. Being aware of your preference for task or people and those of others is very helpful in communications, as you saw earlier. If you're a task person, review some of your recent emails. How many times have you not named anyone? What effect does that have on the people you're communicating with? And people, have a look at your emails. How often have you not actually articulated the task, the subject you're talking about? Does everyone know what the people you are referring to actually do? Options or procedures? This pattern shows how someone reasons in a given context. Do they continually look for new ways to do things, or do they prefer to follow established procedures? Options or procedures is about operational style or motivational reason. A person can basically organise tasks, situations and life in one of two ways: options or procedures. They can search for and use options. What are all the different ways I can do this? Or they can create and look for the procedure, the one right way. Each lives in a very different world, and it's useful to consider the options procedures filters as skills. Being able to design a procedure and then carry it out is an effective way to operate. How much of your life do you give to routines? Where on the scale would you sit? Let's have a look at options people. They're motivated by opportunities and possibilities. They continually look for better ways of doing things. Is there a way to bend or break the rules? They can create procedures, but may have great difficulty in following them because there'll always be a better way of doing it tomorrow. Options people do not feel compelled to finish things. So how do you find out if you're with an options person? Well, you might ask them why they chose their current context, and you'll get an answer with a list of criteria, words like could, what if, might. Always concerned with choice and possibility. So let's stick with the gym example. Options person, why did you choose the running machine? And they might answer, well, I could have gone on the cross trainer and I thought that might have been too much on the calves. So I thought, what if my calves got too big? However, I was going to start with weights and then thought that might not burn enough calories. So I changed my mind and went for the running machine. However, I need to check actually on the spin classes, which really burn up the fat faster than this. So I might do that in a minute. The influencing language for options people are words or phrases like opportunity, choice, break the rules, just for you, another, better way, unlimited possibilities, an alternative, that's one way, here are the options, the sky's the limit, etc. So what about procedures people? Well, they like to follow a set way of doing something. There's a right way to do something and they will follow that procedure every time. Absence of a procedure can leave them feeling lost, and in groups they may resist deviation from standard operating procedures. And once they've embarked on a procedure, they have to get to its end. So if they were asked a why question, they would probably answer it with a how answer. You'd see no evidence of choice, and they'll use words like must, have to, should, and they'll give lots of facts. So let's go back to the gym, and let's ask the procedures person why they chose the running machine. And this is how they may answer. Well, I have to be on this one. When I joined the gym, the personal trainer took me through the program detailing the equipment and time to dedicate to each, which I have to follow for the results I'm looking for. So I'm 12 minutes into my session and I'm on the running machine now, which is just up from the cross trainer, which I have to use in 18 minutes time. So I've come in via the mats where I did my stretches for 5 minutes, and then it's just up from there to this machine for the running session. The influencing language for procedures people is things like the right way, step by step, first and then, tried and true, reliable. How to use this, just follow the procedure. The procedure is the proven methodology, etc. I think it's very helpful to know if someone prefers options or procedures and where they sit on that scale. Because if you're with an options person, you should expect that they're going to choose to do things their way, if they can. So the focus with them needs to be on what they want or what they're trying to avoid. Where following a procedure is strictly necessary, it needs to be seen as the best option. Options people need help to see when they don't have a choice, as they are likely to be able to change their mind at any moment, and sometimes frequently do, and unexpectedly, as the new ideas occur to them in the moment. Procedures people tend to value efficiency and productivity. They like to do things by the book and follow a course of action with a clearly defined step or processes. They can become impatient and even irritated if presented with a range of options or choices, if they see a best practice which can be followed. So, before beginning a project, they need to know what the steps are, what the timetable is, and what is the criteria for success. If you're with a procedures person, expect that they want to do things the right way and that they will struggle to perceive choice. So, what you need to think about is whether they can work with a procedure that reviews all the options and the alternatives. Becoming aware of your preferences in the area of reasoning is the first step in not being ruled by it. A blind spot has been lifted. Plus, we can change anytime we like. That said, the most immediate value of this reasoning meta pattern is the insight it gives you into a person's preferences and why they may be different from you. When you recognise they're not wrong and just different, you can better understand and get on with them. So, people are not their meta patterns. Please remember that. The meta patterns identify habitual patterns of thinking and behaviour rather than personalities. Very few people operate exclusively at one end of the continuum, except perhaps when under stress. Most of us will tend to be towards one end or towards the other. Our preferences may change with the situation too. We may need to be procedural in getting the children ready for school and then become quite options when we arrive at work. Recognizing when you do and when you don't have a choice is the key for us all, options or procedurally inclined. Okay, on to the scope working pattern. Are you concept or detail? Let's say I asked two people about the Bond movie Spectre. What was it like? One says, it's great. A cryptic message spurs Bond to confront Spectre while M fights for the future of MI6. Bond has to protect the baddie's daughter and ends up battling an old foe. The other says, wow, there's a lot to tell. First out, suddenly you're right in the middle of the Day of the Dead festival in Mexico, and there's really breathtaking scenery and a complete sunburst of colours amongst the kind of skeletal costumes and death symbols. The people look really striking. Each one's got a unique outfit that fits the theme, and that really gets it all going. And basically, James Bond starts questioning his future. There's been a merger of MI5 and MI6, and he's not really quite ready to quit yet, especially since he still has an assignment to complete for M. You remember the Judi Dench one, which he reckons he needs to do. That's where things start to go wrong. And it's with the film's first villain, who also has a rather awkward connection with Bond. Now look, there's some really explosive stuff from the get-go, etc., etc., etc. The first answer was from a conceptual person, and the second answer was from a detail person. To find out whether someone prefers concept or detail meta pattern, simply pay attention to how the person structures their answers to your questions. Do they talk in broad terms about the abstracts, principles or concepts? Or do they give information sequentially, in lots of detail? Ask yourself, which do you prefer? How you feel is going to depend on whether you are on the concept or detail side of the continuum. Concept or detail, general or specific, which size of information do you prefer? General big chunks? Do you look at the big picture? Or small chunks, specific information? Do you want to hear the finer points? This pattern relates to the chunk size of information that a person handles well, their ability to receive, incorporate and track the information being presented. Now if you go to the movies to see a film, there will be one story and maybe 5 acts and maybe 40 scenes. This is a good metaphor for understanding this meta pattern. A concept person will summarise the story and maybe the few acts. The detail person will speak at greater length, going into the detail of individual scenes. Plus, there's even potential further detail available at the level of script which you might even receive. A conceptual pattern leads to generalities, summarising. The detail pattern leads to specifics. Sometimes you want one or the other, or you might want to drill down. However, on this continuum, you will have a default mode. That will be bias to one or the other. People who are on the detail side of the scope meta pattern really tend to perceive a task in terms of its constituent parts. They'll concentrate on the detail, and they'll need the detail before they understand the overall, if at all. They treat information in sequence, typically step by step, and if they get lost, they may have to return to the start of the sequence. They'll have difficulty prioritising because they can get bogged down in the detail. They need concrete examples. So, they'll give lots of detail, and they'll go down several levels in describing and explaining something to you. And if they lose a sequence, they may start over again. They'll talk about steps. They'll talk about sequences. They may only be aware of the step before and the step after. So don't assume people running a detail pattern will see the big picture once they have all the information. The influencing language for people who prefer the specific or detail pattern are exactly, precisely, first, specifically, next, then, before, schedule, order, structure, definite, organised. People who prefer the concept or the general meta pattern tend to talk in generalities and are concerned with the overview or overall concept, although they can concentrate on detail for a short space of time. They'll concentrate on the overall direction of a task and need to understand the big picture before they can consider the detail. They like to see how the individual parts fit together and often work best when they can delegate the detail. They tend to summarise tasks and events, and they'll use abstract examples. Typically, they could give an overview with few or no detail. They'll describe situations without reference to a sequence, and they'll talk about summaries, concepts, abstracts and overviews. And the influencing language for people who prefer the concept or general pattern is big picture, basically, generally, typically, overall, flavour, concept, open-ended, spontaneous, essentially. The important thing is, as with every meta pattern, there is a continuum, a spectrum on which we sit. Some people are highly conceptual and some are highly detailed. There is a place for both, and whatever our default, we should be able to chunk up or drill down in any situation. In many encounters, there is a logic to starting a conversation with the general, conceptual or known, and then drilling down to the specifics and the detail. In terms of everyday mindfulness, conceptual and detail people can consider what is the right amount of data to deliver at any one time. Being aware of our own preference is a huge advantage in communication. Learning the preferences of others mean we can help them. And people rarely take offence when being asked for more brevity or for more detail. What does it mean to be through time or in time? Surely we're all in time, you may ask. Well, this meta pattern underlies fundamental aspects of the ways people think and behave in a whole range of areas. Through time people generally experience life in a continuum. They are aware of connections between their past, their present and their future. And when they think about the past, they think in terms of the steps that lead to now. When they think of the future, they can easily imagine steps to where they want to be. They are good at making plans and sticking to them, and they will tend to prioritise this over more immediate satisfactions. However, they may actually miss out on the now because they are too busy planning what comes next. In time people live in a sort of eternal now. They are focused on what they are doing right now and often ignore time passing around them. They are open-ended in their thinking, and they may have several things on the go without being concerned about finishing any of them. They are not good at sticking to plans generally. They cannot easily make sacrifices in the present for long-term gain. They are more interested in what's in front of them than any future implications. The classic NLP way of distinguishing between these two types is to get the people to point to where they feel their timeline lies. Most people are able to point to their future and past quite easily and instinctively, despite their initial puzzlement at such a strange request. The actual graphic representation you see helps to highlight that key difference between the types, where through time people visualise their entire timeline, while for in-time people, the immediate future and past tend to impede their view of any more distant times. Through-timers are focused on future plans or concerns and often are referring to making lists to keep these plans on track. In contrast, in-timers talk more about what they're feeling right now. More subtle cues also exist. When someone uses one hand to punctuate a sequence of events, an in-timer will tend to start with their hand in front of them and count off the steps by moving their hand forward, whereas a through-timer will make similar counting gestures but go from left to right or right to left. In-timers will say, "I tend to live for the moment. You don't know what will happen tomorrow." Through-timers say, "I think it's important to plan for the future, and I'll spend time doing that." It's important to remember that people are ultimately flexible and adaptable, and any pattern or preference we prefer or default pattern can be modified, boosted or diminished. We can change if we want to. So when I talk about profiling through dialogue, these are the patterns I can identify, and once you become aware of your preferences, you know yourself better and are more equipped to get what you want. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of my favourite meta patterns and can see, feel or hear why they are useful in raising your self-awareness and getting what you want. I've discussed representation systems, visual, auditory, kinesthetic and auditory digital. We've looked at directional motivation patterns, towards and away from, and their source or frame of reference, internal or external patterns. And I've touched on people or task, orientation, our reasoning patterns of options or procedures, our patterns for scope, the size of data we prefer, concept or detail. And we've looked at our orientation through time or in time. If you want to learn more about meta patterns and enjoy a profiling session with me, please contact David at worklifedevelopment.co.uk or call me in the UK on 01273 323388. I can conduct profiling for meta patterns face-to-face, via Skype, over the phone or through a questionnaire. Thank you for watching my video.